A few days ago, we exposed the truth behind Trump's Bitcoin executive order, how its language quietly builds the legal foundation for acquisition revaluation and the largest digital asset consolidation in American history. But what most people still don't realize is that Bitcoin was only half the story. Hidden in the very same executive order is a second asset, one far more important to the U.S. Treasury, far more historically significant, and far more deeply embedded in America's monetary system. An asset the government has already confiscated once before. An asset the government has already revalued once before. An asset currently recorded on the Treasury's balance sheet at $42.22 per ounce, even though its market price is over $2,700. That asset is gold. If the Bitcoin plan looked aggressive, the gold plan is something else entirely, because the target for gold is not $2,700 per ounce. It's not $5,000. It's not even $10,000. The target embedded in the arithmetic of the executive order is $20,000 per ounce, a figure that would instantly transform the federal balance sheet, restructure the dollar's backing, and erase trillions in real debt through controlled devaluation. And the mechanism for that transformation, it's already written into Trump's executive order. The same order everyone cheered as pro-crypto. The same order that crypto influencers celebrated without reading past the title. The same order that mentions gold 14 separate times and quietly grants the Treasury direct authority to acquire, revalue, and in times of emergency mandate the transfer of strategic reserve assets from private holders at prices determined by the government itself. This isn't speculation. This isn't theory. This is policy architecture hiding in plain sight. The story begins with the fact most Americans have never heard. For the last 52 years, the United States has carried its gold reserves on the books at a price of $42.22 per ounce. Not market value, not fair value. A statutory price frozen in 1973. This single number conceals one of the largest unrealized gains on earth value waiting to be unlocked by a single policy stroke. Once you understand why the U.S. keeps gold priced at $42.22, you understand the entire plan. And once you understand the plan, you realize that the gold revaluation coming next will make the Bitcoin plan look small in comparison. To understand the gold plan embedded inside Trump's executive order, you must first understand the quiet accounting trick the U.S. government has relied on for more than half a century. A trick so obscure that most Americans, including most investors, have never heard it. A trick that turns gold into one of the most undervalued assets on the federal balance sheet. And a trick that makes a future revaluation not only possible but strategically irresistible. The United States owns 833 tons of gold, the largest official hoard on Earth. That's about 261 million ounces stored in Fort Knox, West Point, and the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. At today's market price of roughly $2,700 per ounce, that gold is worth around $705 billion. But the Treasury does not list that value anywhere, not on its balance sheet, not in its annual reports, not in its public financial statements. Instead, every ounce of America's gold is officially valued by law at $42.22. This statutory price was set in 1973 during the chaotic aftermath of the Nixon shock, and it has never been updated, not once. For 52 years, the United States has carried a $705 billion asset as if it were worth just $11 billion. This creates a gap of almost $694 billion, a hidden dormant pool of unrealized value that the U.S. government can unlock instantly through one action, revaluing the statutory price of gold. Many people believe gold is priced by the free market. But the official price of U.S. gold is determined by statute, not by supply and demand. The government can raise it whenever it wants simply by amending the law or issuing a new valuation directive. It has done this multiple times before: 1934 from 2067 to 35, 1972 from 35 to 38, 1973 from 38 to 42.22. Each adjustment created instant balance sheet gains for the Treasury, and each adjustment occurred during periods of financial stress times when the government needed to strengthen reserves, devalue the dollar, or reduce real debt obligations. The pattern is unmistakable. Gold revaluation has always been a debt weapon. Now consider today's environment. With $37 trillion in federal debt, rising interest payments, and no politically viable path to budget balance, the incentive to revalue gold has never been greater. By increasing the official price, the government can multiply the value of its reserves overnight, improving its balance sheet without raising taxes or cutting spending. It is the cleanest, fastest, most politically convenient way to manufacture trillions in new asset value. And here's the critical point. Trump's executive order explicitly authorizes the Treasury to develop valuation methodologies for strategic assets, including monetary metals. In other words, the legal switch that would allow gold to move from $42.22 to $20,000 per ounce is already installed. All that remains is the moment when policymakers decide it's necessary. And as the debt problem accelerates, that moment is coming. To understand what is coming, you must understand what already happened, because the United States has executed this exact strategy before nearly step for step, word for word, justification for justification. The blueprint was written in 1933, and every policy expert who has studied American monetary history knows that the gold confiscation under Franklin D. Roosevelt remains the most powerful financial maneuver in the nation's history, and the language in Trump's executive order reads like its modern descendant. In 1933, the United States was drowning in deflation, bank failures, and collapsing credit. Confidence in the dollar evaporated. Foreign governments demanded gold redemption. The federal balance sheet was in crisis. Against this backdrop, Roosevelt initiated what would become the most dramatic transfer of private wealth into government hands in peacetime. The first step was classification. Roosevelt declared gold essential to national economic stability. This framing is identical to the modern phrase vital to national security interests used in Trump's order. Once an asset is labeled essential, extraordinary federal powers can be invoked. The second step was acquisition authority. Executive Order 6102 mandated that all Americans surrender their gold to the Federal Reserve within 30 days. Failure to comply meant up to 10 years in federal prison and a $10,000 fine, a devastating penalty at the time. Nearly everyone complied. Americans believed it was temporary. They believed their government, and they handed over roughly 16,000 tons of private gold. The third step was consolidation. The Gold Reserve Act of 1934 transferred all Federal Reserve gold to the U.S. Treasury. From that moment forward, the government, not citizens, not banks, controlled the nation's most important monetary asset. Once the Treasury held it all, the next move became possible. The fourth step was revaluation. On January 30th, 1934, Roosevelt raised the official price of gold from $20.67 to $35 per ounce, a 69% increase overnight. That single policy stroke instantly expanded the federal balance sheet from $4 billion to $6.8 billion. More importantly, it devalued the dollar by 40%, reducing the real burden of government debt by the same amount. Debt was not repaid. It was simply made cheaper through currency dilution. And the citizens who surrendered their gold, they received $20.67 per ounce, watched the government reprice it to $35, and were legally barred from owning gold for the next 41 years. They lost almost half their wealth legally, quietly, efficiently. The playbook worked so flawlessly that it became a template for future monetary resets. And today, with $37 trillion in debt and a statutory gold price frozen at $42.22, the incentives for repeating the past are stronger than ever. The same language, the same justification, the same mechanism, only the century has changed. Most people read the opening paragraph of Trump's executive order and stop there. They saw phrases like digital innovation, American competitiveness, and leadership in financial technology. They believed the headlines. They believed the influencers. They believed the spin. But they didn't read the rest. They didn't notice the sections buried deeper in the document, the sections that mention gold 14 separate times. And they certainly didn't notice that the language surrounding gold is even more aggressive, more explicit, and more strategically potent than everything written about Bitcoin, because Bitcoin may be the future, but gold is the foundation. It is the one asset governments still treat as the ultimate form of sovereignty, and Trump's executive order quietly gives the Treasury precisely the same powers Roosevelt used in 1933, only broader, faster, and more flexible. Let's look at the exact language. Section 2, subsection B. The Secretary of the Treasury shall develop frameworks for the acquisition, custody, and management of strategic reserve assets, including but not limited to digital assets and monetary metals. Monetary metals is the legal term for gold and silver, but primarily gold. This is explicit authorization not to hold gold, but to acquire gold, not just maintain existing reserves, but expand them. This is step 1 of the 1933 blueprint. Section 3, subsection C. The Secretary shall establish valuation methodologies for strategic assets held in reserve, ensuring such valuations reflect both market conditions and national security considerations. This is the most important sentence in the entire document. It gives the Treasury the authority to set official valuations for gold based not on market price, but on national security considerations. Roosevelt used this exact justification to revalue gold from 2067 to 35. Trump's order formalizes the same authority for the modern era. When the government says valuation methodology, they are talking about the legal power to declare gold's price, whether the market likes it or not. Section 4, subsection. A strategic reserve assets may be revalued periodically to reflect their contribution to national economic stability and debt sustainability. This is the revaluation clause. It ties gold directly to debt sustainability, the very same justification Congress used in 1934 to reprice gold upward and erase 40% of the government's real debt obligations. The language is not ambiguous. It is not theoretical. It is not symbolic. It is structural authority. Section 5, subsection D. In times of national economic emergency, the Secretary of the Treasury may implement extraordinary measures, including but not limited to mandatory acquisition of strategic assets from private holders at valuations determined by the Treasury. This is the modern version of Executive Order 6102. Mandatory acquisition, Treasury-determined pricing, economic emergency trigger. The government can require citizens to sell gold. The Treasury can decide the price. Compliance is enforced under emergency authority. And here is the crucial insight. The executive order does not create these powers accidentally. It creates them because the fiscal math of the United States makes them necessary. The order does not hide its intent. It embeds it in clear legal language that mirrors 1933 almost line for line. This is not a digital innovation directive. It is not a pro-crypto policy. It is not a symbolic gesture. It is the most significant reconfiguration of federal monetary power since the Great Depression. And its target is not just Bitcoin. Its primary target is gold. If you want to understand why the government is preparing for a gold revaluation, you must understand why the target is not $3,000 or $5,000 or even $10,000. The true target embedded in the mathematics of the federal balance sheet is $20,000 per ounce. And this number is not speculation. It is not a prediction. It is a calculation, a reverse-engineered figure derived from the exact amount of gold the United States holds and the exact amount of new asset value the government needs to stabilize its collapsing fiscal position. Let's break down the numbers. The U.S. owns 8,133 tons of gold. That equals 261 million ounces. At the current official statutory price of $42.22, that gold is worth only $11 billion on paper, but the market price tells a different story. At approximately $2,700 per ounce, the true market value is around $705 billion. This is the hidden gap that gold revaluation can unlock instantly. But to solve the real problem, $37 trillion in federal debt unlocking $700 billion is not enough. The Treasury needs trillions, not billions. Specifically, it needs $5 trillion or more in hard asset value to restore credibility, support a controlled devaluation of the dollar, and claim that U.S. liabilities are meaningfully backed by tangible reserves. So the calculation is simple: $5 trillion, 261 million ounces, 19,122 per ounce. Round it to a psychologically powerful and geopolitically symbolic number, and you get $20,000 per ounce. This is not a random target. This is not a guess. This is a mathematical requirement. A statutory gold price of $20,000 instantly transforms U.S. gold reserves into a $5.2 trillion asset, large enough for the government to strengthen the federal balance sheet, dilute the real value of existing debt, support a monetary reset, and restore confidence among foreign creditors. Now combine that with the government's parallel plan for Bitcoin targeting 1 million BTC revalued at $1 million per coin, creating another $1 trillion in strategic reserve assets, and you get a total of $6-7 trillion in hard backing for the U.S. financial system. This new system is not a return to the gold standard. It is a reconstructed dollar backed by hard assets on paper, justified by national security language, and enforced through extraordinary emergency powers. A $20,000 gold price is not about what gold is worth. It is about what the government needs gold to be worth. The math dictates the policy. The debt dictates the math. The crisis dictates the timing. And the executive order gives them the authority to execute the plan. To understand how the United States could move from legal authority to full-scale gold consolidation, you must see the process not as one sudden announcement, but as a sequence carefully structured, politically timed, and historically proven. The modern plan does not need to repeat 1933 word for word. It only needs to replicate its logic, and the executive order already provides the legal rails for that logic to unfold in 5 distinct phases. Phase 1, voluntary accumulation, 2025-2026. Before any crisis, before any emergency declaration, the government begins quietly accumulating gold through a patriotic purchase program. The Treasury offers to buy gold from citizens at market price, plus a small premium, framing it as strengthening America's strategic reserves. Many holders, encouraged by rising gold prices and patriotic messaging, sell willingly. No force is required. The government adds hundreds of tons to its reserves without political backlash or controversy. Phase 2, mandatory reporting 2026. Next comes the soft pressure. Regulatory agencies introduce new rules requiring citizens to report gold holdings above a certain threshold, perhaps 50 ounces, perhaps 100. The justification will be anti-money laundering, transparency, or tax fairness. But the real purpose is simple: create a database of private gold holders. This database becomes the backbone of future compulsory measures. Phase 3, taxation pressure, 2026-2027. Once the reporting system is in place, Congress introduces a special tax on excess gold holdings. It could be framed as an unrealized gains tax, a reserve equalization tax, or a luxury metal surcharge. Regardless of its name, the effect is the same: holding gold becomes expensive. A 5% annual tax on large holdings forces many owners to sell. The government or its authorized intermediaries absorbs these ounces at favorable prices. Phase 4, emergency confiscation, 2027. This phase begins when a crisis erupts: a debt ceiling standoff, a treasury market shock, or a credit downgrade. In the name of protecting national security and financial stability, the Treasury invokes its emergency authority already written into Trump's executive order. all gold above a set threshold must be sold to the government at an official price, which will be below market levels. Compliance becomes mandatory. Non-compliance carries severe penalties, asset forfeiture prosecution, possibly imprisonment. Most citizens comply out of fear, just as they did in 1933. Phase 5, Revaluation and Reset 2027-2028. Once consolidation is complete, the Treasury announces the new statutory price, $20,000 per ounce. Overnight government gold reserves surge from $11 billion on paper to more than $5 trillion. The dollar is restructured, debt is diluted through devaluation, and the U.S. balance sheet is reborn. Citizens who complied are left with cash that rapidly loses purchasing power. Those who anticipated the plan keep their wealth. Those who didn't are swept into the largest financial reset in modern American history. This is not hypothetical. It is sequential, predictable, and already in motion. When the revaluation arrives, the divide between those who prepared and those who trusted the system will be absolute. The winners will be few, but their advantage will be enormous. The federal government emerges first, instantly transforming its gold reserves from an $11 billion accounting line into a multi-trillion-dollar asset. Foreign holders storing gold in Switzerland, Singapore, or London retain every ounce and benefit fully from the surge to $20,000. A small minority of Americans who moved their gold offshore, held it in allocated vaults diversified into Bitcoin, or kept their metal outside the reporting net will preserve their wealth through the reset. But the losers will be many. Citizens who comply with mandatory acquisition will receive government-set prices far below market value. Retirees, savers, and wage earners will see their purchasing power devastated as the dollar undergoes controlled devaluation. Bondholders will be repaid in diluted currency. The middle class, whose assets are denominated overwhelmingly in dollars, will bear the cost of the reset they never saw coming. Protection depends on action taken before the emergency decree. Offshore vaulting self-custody, diversified hard asset allocation, reduced paper trails, and active monitoring of regulatory signals are no longer optional, they are essential. In the end, the line is clear. Those positioned early will keep their sovereignty. Those who wait will lose it.